agency, because what he did, spoofing someone's number and then doing that in many jurisdictions, is a crime. Now, I don't think Tucker Carlson wants to press charges, but you need to come on the air and need to explain your intent was not to be mean. Because he says he's pointing out the dangers of AI here. Fine and dandy. But it's serious. Because you don't know what's going on, what's been happening to Tucker behind the scenes. And so you need to understand what you did is not good. And we need to get that out in the open so that it doesn't escalate any further. We'll be right back. It'll be one hell of a transmission. I'm Alex Jones, Infowars.com.
Yes, folks. Welcome to Left Reckoning 117. My name is David Griscom, broadcasting live from Austin, Texas, and I'm joined as always by my good friend and comrade, Matt Leck. How you doing, brother?
I'm doing very well, David. And yes, you don't know what's been happening to Tucker behind the scenes, so don't do pranks on him or it's against the law, okay?
Jones, don't be such a cuck, dude. You can't be sitting around defending Tucker Carlson's honor. You're supposed to be independent media. You're supposed to hate the mainstream. If y'all did not catch that reference, that was from last week, our guest, Chris James, who, I don't know, prankster extraordinaire. From Not Even a Show, joined us to talk about pranking the right wing. And literally the next day, Alex Jones had this entire meltdown and tirade about Chris, which has been pretty interesting to watch, to say the least.
Yeah, it's interesting. Chris has noted, basically Chris spoofed using the Tucker AI, which we talked about on the show, to call Alex Jones and ask him if they could do a show together where like Tucker was topless. I don't know. It's you have to watch the show to hear the prank. And Alex kind of ran with it and then realized he was being pranked. And what's interesting to me is like Alex has really performed anger at it. And I kind of think, and I think Chris thinks this as well, like he's desperate for attention.
Oh yeah,
because Chris hasn't got a lot of incoming flack from the right wing Alex Jones people, which used to exist online as like a sort of the K Hive, for instance, for Kamala Harris. But he's gotten more incoming from like fans of a certain Alex Jones podcast. I think he should have done more to save the world with the prank. But yeah, I don't know. Interesting stuff. We're right on we got our fingertip on the culture. We knew that Chris was going to prank Alex. The AI thing was just ready to pop, and shouldn't threaten legal action. If you were just spending like last summer being a free speech martyr and having documentaries made about you, would be my advice.
I mean, it's talking about being on the pulse. People might have seen Tucker Carlson announced his new program that will be exclusive on Twitter.com just a couple hours ago. And part of our Sunday show this week that we released a little early for patrons, we had Cuba on to talk about Tucker Carlson and what this reshuffle means at Fox News. And exclusive for patrons as well, we had Cuba, Deep State Cuba, if you don't know, on to give us a little bit of an update about what's happening with Russia and Ukraine. You get access to that, patreon.com/Left Reckoning. But we're not looking only backwards, because tonight we got a hell of a show. Like, in just a little bit, we're going to be joined by Gus Bova, somebody whose work I've been reading for years, somebody whose work as a journalist I really respect, a writer for the Texas Observer, on to talk about this really harrowing story of a death at Tesla's Gigafactory right here in the Austin area, specifically one of the conditions that workers were facing there, and this really worrying probable reality that there were attempts to sort of obscure, if not to hide, the fact that this worker died because of the conditions they were exposed to. Again, building one of the wealthiest peoples in the world, Gigafactory here. So keep your eyes out for that Gus Bova interview. And we would be remiss not to celebrate and to plug and pitch. Later tonight, we're going to be joined by our good friend, teacher, TMBS alum, all-around good guy, Harvey Kaye, who's going to be joining us to give his perspective on the first term of the Joe Biden administration and also why he has decided to throw his weight behind Marianne Williamson in the upcoming Democratic Party presidential primary. Harvey will also be joining us in the post game. So this is a pretty good reason to join up if you haven't in the past, because he'll be there. You can take some questions and calls. You can leave us a message at 1-940-289-7234. If you want Harvey to be answering anything from you, remember, you got to keep it short, a minute or less, and get it in now versus later, because I don't know if Harvey will be able to hang out with us for the entirety.
Yes. Yeah. Sorry. Let me just underline what David said there. If you have a question for Harvey, we haven't done this, and we should, where we have a guest in the post game and let them actually respond to calls, but do not do it over a minute, because otherwise we just don't have time to sit through calls while we got a guest. So keep it short.
So you get access to that over at patreon.com/leftreckoning. But yeah, I mean, hell yeah, I'm excited. This is going to be a big show. So let's get into some of our top stories before we bring Gus on. First off, just a quick update, something to celebrate, because we're about to talk about some dark stories right here in Austin. If you've been watching the show over the past few months, we have been covering this attempt by the police department and the police union here to subvert democracy. Quick retelling. There was a proposal, a ballot initiative to create some, basic, very important, but basic oversight of the police department in the city of Austin. The police department in Austin, like many other cities, has had a history of murdering civilians, using excessive force, and they want to be outside of the law, and certainly outside of public oversight. We've talked about the way that the police have talked about this. We played video, for example, of the president of the police union here, basically saying that in his ideal world, there would be no room for the public when it comes to oversight of the police. And we've also covered this really dastardly attempt by the police department here to put up an alternate proposition with language so obscure and so unclear that if you are just a regular person who might support, for example, civilian oversight of the police department, you might accidentally sign this petition to get that on the ballot. The police department eventually got enough people to sign this petition to get it on the ballot. And over the weekend, last weekend, there were two proposals on the ballot in the city of Austin. One put up by the organization Equity Austin, right, which actually had police oversight in it, and one with language that seemed like it was for police oversight, but was really just a grab bag of pro-cop policies sponsored by, effectively the Austin police union. Well, results are in by an overwhelming margin, something like 80 to 20%. Prop A, the Police Oversight Act, passed overwhelmingly, and the police proposition was soundly defeated. Just a huge victory for all the people who have been on the ground doing this work. I mean, really, when you get a result like that, like, you can't really make any complaints about strategy or tactics. You just got to take your hat off and say thank you for helping us build a safer city. For people in the area, unfortunately, this means that there's going to be a big fight coming up, because it's going to be on the city council and also on the city manager to sort of enforce this. And there are, unfortunately, serious questions about how tenacious these folks will be in supporting it. So it's not done yet. But when it comes to bringing this question to people, overwhelmingly, people in the city of Austin think that there should be police oversight. So shout out to that.
On that note, I just want to bring this up: the Austin Police Association, which, if you want to see,
Which is the
threats,
cop union,
the cop union, like threats to democracy, it's like cop union Twitter. It's just wild how flagrant it is. Austin Police Association. The Austin Police Association is aware of the election results and has taken immediate action to determine the city's intentions regarding the implementation and enforcement of the illegal provisions contained in Prop A. The APA simply will not stand by while this city and anti-police activists operate with blatant disregard for state law and the rights and protections afforded to our hardworking men and women. The APA, this just sounds like a villain. Like,
that's the thing that's so wild about it, is like, they are like actively playing the role of villain from that to, like, again, we had Sam and Seneca, really incredible local organizers here in Austin on the program a couple months back, because there was another fight because the police department tried to negotiate a contract out of nowhere to sort of invalidate this election in May, and they made a big stink, and the president came forward and said a bunch of nasty stuff. And also a lot of their supporters were literally like people who had recently lost their loved ones to police violence and murder in the city, regularly calling these things that are on camera alleged murders, right? Instead of what they are, police brutality and a very purposeful terror done by the state here. To like this other video that we played a couple weeks back of the president of the Austin Police Association saying that, yeah, I don't think that the public should have any role. Obviously very local, but this is like police mentality across the country. And, this is sneaky ballot language is not unique to Austin. This is something that the right is trying to do, and certainly the police are trying to do all across the country. So very lucky. I mean, not lucky, very fortunate that we were successful in putting that back. But this is something that even if you're not in Texas, even if you're not in Austin, it's like, these are the kind of things you need to be prepared for because they're all playing out of the same playbook.
Yeah, I mean, and it's not just an American problem. Police forces in other countries have it's monopoly on force kind of corrupts in a certain way, but like American cops, like like you said, like this could be about any of these like there's no part of the country that this happens. It's everywhere where they're De Blasio like was cowed into submission by this sort of like bullying and mentioning like his kids and stuff like that. Like these are like the official thugs of America.
Yeah. Well, so we're going to have Gus on in a second, and we're going to have Harvey on later, talk about Biden and Marianne Williamson. We're going to, we're focusing a little bit on Texas on this episode because unfortunately a lot has happened. And I'm sure, as everybody knows, Texas has been the site of a lot of really horrific tragedies, both in this past week, but frankly, like, for years now when it comes to gun violence and the inaction of the state here. And, people know over the weekend about this awful shooting in Allen, Texas, in South Texas as well. A car crashed into a larger group of people. And in Cleveland, Texas, not even trying to put these on a scale, but just like the height of depravity. A man came and killed an entire family because the family said, "Hey, could you not be firing your gun in the middle of the night while my baby is trying to sleep?" How has Texas, and more importantly, not Texans, but Texas's government responded to this? It's been, for the most part, silence. Apart from things like this, for example, Greg Abbott acknowledging the killing in Cleveland, Texas, saying, "I've announced a $50,000 reward for info on the criminal who killed 5 illegal immigrants on Friday." Right. Even in this moment where Abbott is, maybe seeming a little bit more humane, talking about a tragedy like this, he has to dehumanize folks. Yep. And people have rightfully pointed out after the fact that Abbott doesn't understand their immigration status. And in fact, people, at least one of the people there was a legal resident of the United States, but it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter at all, right? It's fundamentally denying the humanity of people, downplaying the state of the crisis that all Texans are facing, which is this onslaught of antisocial, anti-human violence. That is, it's not unique to Texas, unfortunately. It's all over, but it is amplified here, no doubt about it. That was his response. And then you want to talk about the things that happened over the weekend, right? More horrors and crises. Very little when it comes to Abbott. He went to a vigil in Allen, right? Didn't really make any real statements on it. So you see this crisis, you see real direct threats to people's lives in this state. And what has the government been willing to do? Very, very little. Where are their energies? Where is Greg Abbott? What are they focusing on? It has been to continue to use the border as a political prop. So this is Greg Abbott just the other day talking about, on Fox News, of course, talking about the newest extension of Operation Lone Star.
So what we are doing is we are deploying today a new Texas Tactical Border Force made up of elite National Guard who are specifically trained for one thing, and that is to identify areas where illegal immigrants are trying to cross the border and to fill that gap and to repel them, to deny them access to entry into the United States. They can do it one of several ways. They can physically turn back those who are trying to cross the border illegally. Also, they were building immediate concertina wire border barriers to prevent people from coming across the border. You saw an early iteration of this back in December when you saw long lines of people trying to cross into El Paso. In a matter of 24 hours, the National Guard built a concertina wire border barrier, and it stopped that inflow immediately. We're using strategies like that up and down the border to identify locations where the cartels are trying to smuggle people across the border and put a stop to it.
Oh, you're muted, David. Oh,
okay.
No,
Sorry.
you're not.
I'm fine. What does that like actually look like physically? These are some videos that have come out that Abbott has shared of these barbed wire fences going up all across our southern border here. Right, I mean, like the height of like just the damage that does to human beings.
Like World War One.
What?
Looks like World War One reenactment.
It's 100% that, and the Texas DPS has been, basically regulated to relegated to sharing these kind of fearmonger videos of this like military style border, at the Texas-Mexico border. This stuff has tremendous amounts of human consequence. I've been writing for the past 2 years, especially about what this is. This is called an operation called Operation Lone Star. Operation Lone Star has been a tremendous waste of state money. We're talking billions of dollars at this point. Not even been successful by the very nasty parameters that they set out for this mobilization. It has been a complete boondoggle for private corporations who oftentimes aren't even vetted, right? And is it surprising that somebody like Abbott, who's deeply, deeply committed to making sure that his donors and political allies get nice ass government contracts to do bullshit like this, right? So there's a financial aspect to this too, on top of the bigotry, right? Is that like this is a cash grab for certain private corporations to fund the to make the fencing, to provide the meals, to do whatever for this National Guard mobilization. Remember, we've covered on this show, and I've written about it elsewhere, that even for the National Guard members, this has been a really brutal experience because only up until recently, National Guard members, for example, like if they were to die or be injured in the line of duty, they don't get the same benefits as they would get if they were called up by the federal government, meaning that people have died, right? Are forced to file workplace comp. It's something that takes months, and oftentimes they don't get anything close to the full amount that they would get again if they were killed in active duty. Right? This has just been a waste of state resources, of the lives of Texans, not to mention, obviously, the terrorizing of migrants coming into the state of Texas. He's been doing this for years now, trying to run this parallel border operation that does nothing for the most part to really curtail migration, and does everything to give him these photo ops because this is good politics. You want to be able to see the future. Something bad happens in Texas. You know what Greg Abbott's going to do in the next few days? He's going to do a border photo op, or he's going to do something like go to Austin Bergstrom in front of a bunch of planes and say it's time for us to act. It's extremely anti-human politics. This does nothing this has meaningfully has very little to do with migration. All this does is embolden coyotes or like human smugglers, for example, wage war on people who are fleeing their homes, and make Texas a much darker and less friendly place than I know it can be, and I know that it should be. When it comes down to it, the entire migration system that we have in this country has been broken, and it's been broken for a long time. there are a lot of reasons why the GOP plays this up, because they know that it's a winning issue for them. They know that when bad things happen in the state of Texas, they can just point at the border, to the real issues that do happen in the border, right? Because the way that it's happening right now, and it was happening under Biden, it was happening under Trump, and it was happening under Obama, is that you do have border communities, right, dealing with the weight, for example, of like American adventurism abroad, American devastation of countries throughout Central America, right? And that pressure gets put onto those border communities because the federal government has been asleep at the wheel. Now, there might be reasons we can get into as to why. But the fact is that this is something that the GOP recognizes that it's a winning issue for them. The fact is, though, is the GOP doesn't have any solutions to it, or at least the state level GOP doesn't, right? All that they have is photo ops and pictures of, scary border crossings, and take a picture in front of a bunch of heavily armed National Guard members, or members of the police, of different police departments in the state of Texas. It's pure theater. It's pure hatred. And it certainly stokes the really nasty and vile tendencies that we've been seeing in American and Texan society over the past few years. But never forget for a second that whenever Abbott goes and does this kind of thing, there are people who just see dollar signs. And I don't want to sit here and say that the only reason that this is happening is because a lot of people can make a lot of money. But people always ask, like, what's the Marxist sort of understanding as to why the GOP can play this? Well, one, it helps out the GOP because it's such a winning political issue for them, because the Democrats, for the most part, don't have a bumper sticker answer to it, nor do they, frankly, in my opinion, have any real intention of solving the crisis, right? So it's a good victory for the GOP. A lot of financial interest in the state of Texas have a lot of interest in seeing people like Greg Abbott stay in power. We're going to get into somebody like Elon Musk in a second about the devastation and the war that he's been waging on working class Texans. So they want to see those people in power because it helps them out. But then there's also this entire downstream economy of people who benefit financially, directly from these billions of dollars that we're wasting in a state that has one of the lowest insured rates, in a state that is struggling immensely when it comes to underfunding of public schools, and a state that is awash in brutal violence caused by the fundamental sicknesses of American society, right? So there are a lot of people who see this and they're like, I'm not even talking about like the casual viewers of politics. I'm talking about the real powerful people who have influence in creating these kind of outcomes, seeing these kind of things as being a good thing. And it is truly despicable. And it won't change until our politics change, because as we've seen from Biden and as we've seen under Obama, the real intention to deal with this crisis is extremely limited.
Right.
Well, we're going to go to Gus in just 1 second. But because we're going to talk about a little bit with Gus, I want to introduce one quick thing to sort of get us set up, because we're going to talk about a death of a worker at the Gigafactory just down the road from me here in the Austin area. Somebody who died because of the lack of protections that workers face, both in Texas and nationally when it comes to heat protections. And there's been a lot of talk in the past couple of years, Matt, about how the GOP is sort of reshuffling itself to being a party of the working class. And, I don't know. I know you're not really following Texas politics super closely, but I want to introduce you to this fella, Dustin Burrows, who's a Republican from Lubbock, who introduced this bill, HB 2127. Which is aimed at preventing locality. So cities like Austin, cities like Houston, cities like Dallas, cities like San Antonio. I'm not going to go through all the towns in Texas, but where the vast majority of people live, and because of the way that the state politics is set up, have very limited ability, to sort of create viable majorities in politics. Prevent them from being able to put up basic worker protection. This is a GOP state representative. This is put out by the AFL-CIO of Texas, talking about all these horrible things that could potentially burdening businesses in the state of Texas.
Overtime fairness, allowing, basically saying workers can decline overtime without penalty from an employer, fair chance hiring, making sure no criminal background checks. And those are just the ones we know about in Texas today. Let's talk about the ones that are coming now from a neighboring state. Pay transparency would require employers to disclose pay ranges as well as benefits, not only to applicants, but for internal offerings and promotions as well. Salary history restrictions, preventing employers from asking applicants how much they make at previous jobs. Predictive scheduling, requiring employers to provide work schedules to employees in advance, usually 2 weeks. Prohibiting criminal background checks by employers. Paid COVID leave, paid sick leave, requiring private employers to provide health insurance at $380 a week. Eliminating at-will employment.
Yeah, and David, I believe, just dropped off there. Did David freeze? I just want to make sure he froze up for me briefly, but he seemed to be going just fine. Hey, you there?
Can you see me?
Yes, I do. We might need to ask you're frozen for me though, so I need.
Yeah,
Let's
why don't you
confirm
go
with
to? Why don't we put the Gus on? And I'll figure out what my issue is.
Okay,
I'm
cool.
sorry,
Sounds
everybody.
good. All right, folks. All good. All right, we will go to our interview with Gus too. I just want to say right up, people should read this Gus piece too this evening. I was very impressed. I mean, not only by us chatting with him, but the writing of this piece. So here's our talk with Gus Bova.
Welcome back, everybody. David here, joined by Matt, as always. How you doing, brother?
I'm doing well, David. Good to be with you.
I'm very excited for this. I mean, I wish it was under better circumstances. We have Gus Bova on the program. I've been a fan of Gus Bova's writing for a long time, and the great work that they do at Texas Observer. Gus, thank you so much for joining us on Left Reckoning today.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Well, for people who've been watching Left Reckoning for the past few years, we've been covering a lot of what Elon Musk's companies coming to Texas has meant for working class Texans in particular. And this story that just dropped yesterday by Gus in the Texas Observer really paints, in my opinion, a very harrowing picture of some of the human cost to this kind of move fast, ignore a lot of the dangers and potential consequences from these actions that have come with a lot of Musk's companies, from Tesla to SpaceX. But people should read this piece. He died helping build Tesla's Gigafactory. Tesla didn't tell local officials. Gus, could you tell the listeners who Altelmo Reviera was?
Yeah, he was a 57-year-old man, a father and grandfather, who'd also recently remarried just a year before the incident we're about to talk about. He was living down in the valley in Starr County, but he had traveled to the Austin area to work on the construction site of the soon-to-be Tesla Gigafactory, just southeast of Austin proper. And this was September 2021. He was new to that job site. Even though it was late September, it was a hot Texas day. It got up to 96 degrees. They were working with concrete, preparing a concrete pour of some kind. And around mid-afternoon, he began to show these symptoms, confusion, rambling, sort of at one point, kind of just wandering off, confused about where he was, seemingly. All of this, it became clear pretty soon, were the symptoms of heat stroke or hyperthermia is the technical cause of death from the medical examiner for him. But basically, the heat and the work together had overwhelmed his body's cooling mechanisms. And this is something that can sneak up even on an experienced construction worker, because once your kind of circulation and perspiration systems fail, you can get up above 105 degrees in minutes. And that is what happened. And although they did take him to a Tesla, he was working for a Tesla contractor called Belcan Services, but his direct employer was a Tesla contractor, not Tesla itself. But he was then taken to Tesla's on-site medical trailer. They attempted CPR, but it was too late. And so he was pronounced dead out there in a trailer at the half-built site of the Tesla Gigafactory. So yeah, just to get started.
Yeah, no, I mean, like, I want to talk more about the heat and those conditions, both there and also just generally in the state of Texas. But I think it's really important to, like, you know, understand the scale here of this story, because something like this, there are reporting requirements, and in this aspect, who's responsible for reporting a death like this, and how was this incident reported at first?
So there's a couple aspects here. The story says, right in the headline, that Tesla didn't tell local officials, right?
Mm-hmm.
Now that refers to something that's kind of unique to this case, which is that when Tesla came here to Texas, to the Austin area, they did so with the help of tax breaks from both a school district and Travis County, which is where Austin is. And during the Travis County process, there was a lot of pushback from labor advocates and progressive advocates saying, one, we don't think these are necessary. Tesla doesn't need our tax breaks. And two, we're not comfortable with the level of worker safety provisions included in this deal. Travis County included some, but not all of the requirements that advocates were asking for. One that was included was Tesla must report any injuries or deaths that occurred during construction of the Gigafactory. They then proceeded to, according to all the documents that I obtained, they proceeded to not report this man, Altelmo Reviera's death to the county, or a number of other injuries that I was able to find by basically combing through this big OSHA data file. I was able to find at least 6 more injuries they did not report to the county. I do not know if it was intentional concealment or what the motivation was, but the fact is they did not report it, and it will now be up to the county to decide whether they consider that to be a breach of their tax break agreement. The county has just told me that they're continuing to review the matter, and that because, well, they didn't say, but basically because I asked, they have asked Tesla to go back and provide the missing information. So that was, a minor impact of the story that happened while reporting it. There is another side to this, which is, I think related to your question, which is the Altelmo Reviera's cause of death. So basically, I don't want to go way too into the weeds, but medical examiners do autopsies, and for biological reasons, it can be difficult for them to know that someone died of heat stroke, because basically they would have to get your temperature readings from the time that you died. Basically, the delay makes it difficult for them to diagnose. So they initially recorded it as the guy just had high blood pressure and plaque in his arteries, had a heart attack. That's it, just a heart attack. For some strange reason, EMS got their temperature data to the medical examiner later, months later, which led the medical examiner to change the cause of death to hyperthermia, which then leads to OSHA actually citing the employer for exposing the workers to unsafe temperatures, and lets the family of the man actually have some idea of what happened and then go file a lawsuit against Tesla and Belcan. All that happens because the medical examiner redoes their medical findings, basically. And the reason I explain all that detail is many of these cases go unrecognized in general. Many of these cases of workers dying of heat on the job go unrecognized altogether. So,
well, even mentioning like different sorts of comorbidities in a pretty like heinous way, and so much of this article, it's like the power of definition. Like, is it a contractor or is it a worker? And that that leads to some fuzziness. Is it an accident or is it an injustice? And like you said, with all the this is why we need like state officials to come in and protect workers, because otherwise you have these things fall through the cracks. Like you said, like talk about like the reporting of these and like how much OSHA even tracks down of what is reported.
Yeah, I mean, so in theory, workplace deaths are reported to OSHA by employers. Employers they will get in trouble if they're found to have not reported a death.
Mm-hmm.
Where that gets slippery is someone dies in a hospital however many hours or days after the workplace incident, and then the employer fails to report it then. Or in some cases, there's probably even more egregious cases of underreporting. Just like big picture numbers, there's one part of the federal government that uses a bunch of different methods to gather an overall figure of how many people die on the job in the United States, right? And one of their methods is basically asking employers to anonymously report whether they've had worker deaths. It's separate from OSHA. And their final count usually shakes out to around 5,000 a year, 5,000 on the job worker deaths a year. OSHA investigates like a fifth of that number. OSHA investigates like 1,000 a year. So one way or another, partially through underreporting, partially because of some weird bureaucracy, like mines are technically in a separate, but one way or another, there's way more deaths than death investigations for sure. And then if you want to drill down even further to how many heat deaths are actually correctly identified as heat deaths and investigated in that way, there you're looking at, I think I found, what did I find? 120 OSHA investigations over 6 years, whereas the group Public Citizen has an estimate that there are actually like 2,000 a year. So 120 versus like 10,000. That'd be like the ratio of actual heat deaths versus how many get inspected by OSHA. And I'll just say it can be easy to beat up on OSHA. It's not really any type of, I'll just say it's an understaffed agency. It always has been, I think, for obvious reasons. Overstretched, understaffed. You want them to pass rules, like they don't have an actual set of clear rules on heat, but there's intense industry opposition to that, incredible regulatory burden. When they've passed regulation on certain dangerous chemicals and stuff, it's taken decades sometimes for them to get a rule through. So imagine heat, which is a much bigger issue for employers to worry about. So
Right.
And I just want to say something really fast to the audience too on like the contractor aspect here, because like this is a really fundamental thing that you're seeing not just in Tesla facilities but all across the board, where you hire contractors to do the work. You hire a contracting company to do the work on your facilities, and then if things are happening, you're like, oh well, the contractor is responsible. And yes, that is the way it's typically treated legally. But in the same way that like if the contractor wasn't building the Gigafactory, for example, the way that Musk and Tesla wanted them to, in my opinion, they also do have responsibilities for the way that workers are being treated. And like, this wasn't just like one isolated incident. There have been a lot of harrowing stories about what's happened building this Gigafactory. I know there's a big report a few months ago that was released by The Guardian about workers who are getting fake OSHA certification. Right, so this is something that was really endemic throughout the entire Gigafactory build out process.
Yeah. There have been there was prior reporting about both wage theft and falsified OSHA certificates, and there was also some prior reporting in More Perfect Union that alluded to this issue of the unreported injuries, but through a bunch of work, I was able to actually pin down specifics on which injuries, which companies and things. So this has been like bubbling for a little bit. Plus, just if you've kind of just been around Austin, or if you have friends in unions and stuff, it's just kind of been in the water. Like you just been hearing people talk about sketchy things happening at that site, because so many people were in and out that site. And there was all little rumors were coming my way before I was ever able to get something I could actually do a story on, you know? So yeah. And as far as basically using contractors as a way out of any liability, that's obviously useful. That's a useful argument for a company like Tesla. But as a matter of fact, they can be legally liable for what happens on their site. And I think sort of the premise of everything that went into that Travis County agreement was Travis County is asking you to basically be responsible for what happens on this site. That's why they put in all these requirements of hire contractors that are women and people of color, All your contractors need to have workers' compensation insurance, which is not legally mandated in Texas, the only state in the union that doesn't require it. So they were putting in things that, were based on the premise of you're the owner, you're the developer of this site. I mean, the buck's got to stop somewhere.
Mm-hmm. And like there were, and again, like I mean, and in a little bit, I want to get more broad into talking about some of Musk's other companies and this move here and like the way that his companies sort of interact with local and state governments. But like, don't forget, folks, that like the whole thing, at least from my perspective, being from here, living here, was when this factory came, was like this is going to be a gold mine for the community. This is going to provide a lot of jobs and all these kind of things. And like we had Bob Leibel on the show when he was running for county commissioner to talk about the deal, which I found a lot of it to be way too generous to this company and one of the wealthiest people in the world. But yeah, these like provisions in here were to sort of claw back and say like, no, we need these things to actually come through for people.
And I mean, I'm hoping now the story is out that the county judge or some commissioner will actually talk to me, because I mean, they just ran everything through their sort of official spokesperson for the story, and we're just very cautious. But they are all elected politicians, and I was sort of surprised. And had Bob won, I would have had someone to get a live interview with. But instead, I just got kind of an anodyne statement from the county, though at least they acknowledged that they were looking into it. So.
Mm-hmm. Well, I wanted to like focus a little bit because like this is a story that is like it's frightening and it's horrifying, but also like I used to work concrete in the South, and I know how difficult it can be to deal with heat. I remember I worked in a non-unionized facility doing nothing as intense or industrial as this, just laying foundations for housing. But how much of a fight it was with our bosses, for example, say like we need water breaks, right? It's 100 degrees outside, and knowing that there is this real threat that something horrible like this can happen. I mean, one thing that you note in your story, and I know a lot of advocates in Texas, across the board have been hitting on, is that like the heat deaths in Texas are out of control, even when you compare them to other places that have a lot of heat, that are hot places.
Yeah, I mean, because of that under recording issue again, it's probably a little more solid to look at like just construction deaths.
Mm-hmm.
Knowing that a lot of those are heat deaths in there. But yeah, I mean, absolutely. I mean, it can, as an average, a construction worker is dying every 3 days or so in Texas, which is completely, I cut some numbers for certain years, and it was more than California and Pennsylvania combined. So that's like the most populous state and the 5th most populous state combined, and Texas was surpassing both of them. So, it's a national problem, and it's a Texas-specific problem too.
Yeah, so you don't have to be a smart person to realize that it's like obviously it's a major concern here, and the fact that we do have a state government for the most part, which is really really slow to react to threats to working people. It only makes it worse.
I mean, it's just from like a couple thousand feet up or whatever. I mean, Texas's leaders have pretty openly been saying like, this is the cost we're willing to pay for our theory of economic growth. Basically, I mean, that's kind of what they say every legislative session, every 2 years, session after session, when anyone demands. I mean, there's been a bill kicking around the Capitol for many sessions now to create rest break requirements statewide, because Austin and Dallas both have municipal policies requiring rest breaks. And pretty much anyone will tell you that city by city is not the ideal way to pass and enforce policies like that. Statewide would be much better. Instead, they've rejected that bill year after year. And I think this week, the Senate will probably approve the House bill that's going to undo Austin and Dallas's rest break policies and basically make it almost across the board impossible for any cities to pass any progressive labor policies in Texas. So
I know we have a clip, I'm forgetting his name live, of a Texas Republican attacking some of these crazy California and business
from
policies like paid sick leave and things like that. I mean, it's rough. And like, again, for people who like don't follow Texas politics closely, like this is why like a lot of these fights, like a lot of things that I've written about for like Jacobin have been about this war that we're seeing from the state level GOP on municipalities and on localities, because for a lot of people in cities like where the vast majority of people live, by the way, in the state, they do want there to be protections for workers, and they might feel foreclosed right now with the way that statewide politics are happening, but like these attempts from like the state level GOP to wage war and prevent cities and municipalities from basically being able to pass their own rules and regulations on how work is conducted on the state, I mean, really sets us back. I totally agree that patchwork way is not a solution, but like we're not even like, they're basically trying to prevent us from being able to do patchwork regulation or protections.
Precisely.
In the last couple of minutes, I wanted to talk a little bit with you about another one of Musk's companies. I know you've written about it and we've covered it a decent amount on this program, but SpaceX, right? And SpaceX is, it's in South Texas. It's in a part of the state that, in my opinion, has been really underserved, both from the state government and the federal government. There's been significant damage, both like to the local communities and to the ecology of the region and the environment. I mean, could you give people, because everyone basically, when it comes to SpaceX, it's like you watch the rockets go and you either think that's cool and interesting, or you see them blow up and you dunk on them on Twitter, right? And I'm not saying anything's wrong with doing that. I do the same thing. But there's this whole other story about like local people and people who reside in that area who basically have this massive corporation come into their backyard and starts dictating to them like literally how they live their lives in some aspects.
Yeah, absolutely. Just to caveat, my reporting on this was mostly done in 2021, but as far as I'm aware, the broad strokes of it are all still the same. Basically, SpaceX chose to set up shop on basically right up against this heavily used but free to access beach, which is just towards the water from Brownsville, Texas, just south across a ship channel from South Padre Island, which maybe some of the viewers here have heard of. This beach has basically long been the poor people's beach, the locals' beach. Tourists would come down from other parts of the state and country and go to South Padre, but locals from Brownsville and the Valley, they would go to this free beach. And it was the kind of place that, it just rows of pickup trucks all the way up and down, and people grilling, people fishing. It was just a family type beach. Is very that was sort of borderline kind of secret to the community there. And then not to mention that sort of the area around the beach is actually very ecologically sensitive. That little southern tip of Texas has all kinds of plant and animal species that aren't anywhere else in America, and sometimes aren't anywhere else, period. SpaceX chose that place because the state of Texas basically said, we will literally modify our open access to beaches law so that you can come here and you can shut down this public road to the beach whenever you want. All of our legislators will basically sing your praises and give you anything you ask for, basically, to get you to come here. And you basically got from that the result you might expect, which is every time there was a limit put on how many hours they were supposed to shut down that road to the beach for, SpaceX would just blow past it. I mean, it wasn't really, as a reporter, it wasn't hard to figure out. It was obvious. It was blatant. The cap was here and they were going double. They just shut it down whenever they want, practically. And just other little stuff like, they told federal regulators that the light from their launch site wouldn't reach the beach during sea turtle nesting season, So I just walk out to the beach during sea turtle nesting season at night, look at the launch site, the light is covering the entire beach. It's like, I take a picture, here it is, but there aren't really consequences. And so I think it is a through line. I don't think this is a super controversial opinion, really, to say there's a through line with Musk's companies of, if you give him an inch, he'll take a mile. I mean, of just sort of, he'll blow through any barriers if the barriers aren't real, and, in different ways, low income Texans of color kind of specifically are kind of paying the price, Of course, on the other hand, there are jobs, there is tax revenue generated from these things to some extent, but and so just to wrap it up, I was not surprised to see just the other week when they had their big advertised launch of the name of what's the name? Do you remember the name of the rocket?
I'm forgetting it right now.
They're
Yeah,
launching the Falcon 1, Falcon, and then they're launching the big one, the one that can go to Mars one day.
Yeah.
Anywho, they finally launched it, and of course it blew to smithereens. And of course SpaceX said, LOL, rapid unscheduled disassembly. Isn't this hilarious? And then the particle rained down on like communities for miles around for 24 hours after or whatever. So.
And the size of I mean, obviously it was a massive rocket. One of the larger ones, if not the largest one ever, launched. Way bigger than anything that they were approved for, too, right? They just sort of pushed the envelope.
They just changed it. They just changed it. And I mean, ultimately, the federal government decided to allow it.
Yeah.
But yes, basically, they just changed the whole plan from what they originally approved for. That's right.
No, I mean, there's like a lot of stories from, what's going on with the Boring Company around here in the Austin area and Kyle, Texas. I mean, what's frightening for me as a Texan is that, like, when these companies were coming here, you would read about some of the things that would happen at Tesla, SpaceX, or facilities elsewhere, or like the Boring Company's activities in other places, and realizing that, like, if they're able to get away with it in a place like California, which obviously is not perfect state or anything like that, but knowing what the political environment that he would be coming into here, it is really worrying. Yeah. Well, Gus, I can't thank you enough for coming on Left Reckoning. We'd love to do it again sometime soon.
Yeah.
People, make sure that you subscribe to the Texas Observer. I mean, they really are indispensable for covering the state. I've been reading them, I mean, forever, honestly, and I really appreciate all the work that you do, Gus, and all of your coworkers as well.
Yeah, man. Let's do it again sometime.
Oh, yeah, brother.
Thanks, Gus.
Story about story.
Sorry about that.
No worries. I'm sorry, y'all, for my technical issue a second ago. I think it should be okay.
Got a ghost in the machine.
It's the problem. It's the problem with doing a live show sometimes. But no, really, like, having Gus on the program was such an honor. I mean, that's such a terrifying story. Is there anything you want to say about the Musk stuff? Because I know, like, we have to be careful when we have journalists on, because we don't want to get them into trouble.
Yeah, I just think it's so sad that, like, a guy like Musk gets, and it sucks being like the naysayers all the time saying, this promise. Because I know I'm from North Dakota, right? Like, we went. A woman in Grand Forks went viral because she wrote a glowing review of how great it was we got an Olive Garden. So, like, I know what it's like to be, like, excited something's coming to your community.
Mm-hmm.
And that, like, something like Tesla, it's the future, it's jobs, and then to see what it actually is. And it sucks. It's just like abuse. Like, that's Elon's edge. We talked about this before with the electric cars. His edge is he's willing to go farther than Google is going to, because Google has a reputation. They don't want to, like, have dead toddlers on the front end of their AI vehicles. Elon's going to maybe push that. And, like, that's really the advantage here. He's going to not give a fuck if his contractors are dying of heat stroke.
No, I mean, like, and I'm sorry, I just want to hit that point 10 times over, is that these companies, they use outside contractors for their work so that when stuff like this happens, because, like, look, I just watched Vice, I guess former Vice is going under, but there was a documentary put out by Vice that I was watching about, like, the Elon Musk cult, right? And not even getting into that, like if you listen to the way he talks online or in interviews, he always talks about what he calls production hell, right? And how difficult it is to produce cars. Remember, this guy's not producing the cars, right? So if he's talking about, oh, this is taking such a toll on him, imagine what the workers are going through. And imagine what this guy does. What he opened up the Gigafactory here. He wanted that thing done, and they built that thing up really fast for how big of a structure it is, right? So when somebody like that is saying, I want this building done as quickly as possible, no reasonable person is going to sit there and could look at that and say, like, well, that's not going to take a toll on the workers and the people who are put in that position, right? And this whole, like, whatever, you can whine on me on Twitter about it, like, oh, well, Musk didn't actually hire isn't the one who's responsible directly for the deaths at this facility because it's a contractor. No, everything at that facility is specified by the boss. And any person with any kind of understanding of engineering, any kind of understanding about construction can tell that when you start pushing deadlines in the way that he was, that, corners are going to get cut. And in a state like Texas, as in many other places in this country, when corners get cut, what that typically means is workers are working long hours in dangerous conditions. And these are the human consequences of somebody's like Musk's greed and vanity, frankly.
Yeah. And, one other note is people should read that. Gus is a great writer, but there's a graphic segment on what actually happens when the body is unable to cool itself and why it gets up to those like temperatures of even like 106 degrees, even if it's not that hot outside. It's because your body is itself a engine and it is producing heat. And if because of the exterior environment and your internal environment, all of a sudden your exhaust goes out. I mean, it's horrible. It's really horrible that happens. That happens. You see it in like athletics sometimes too. Like you got to slow down. You got to drink water, and it's important that people feel empowered to do that. And this guy literally told people he didn't feel like he could take breaks.
No, I mean, I'm telling you, like, if anyone, and I know a lot of listeners have, if you've ever worked construction jobs in the summer, you know exactly what this person went through, and it's horrifying. That not only that it happened, but that, I mean, it looks like there was an attempt to hide this. I don't even know if we mentioned it during the interview, but I think OSHA fined the contractor about $14,000 for this person's death, which I don't know.
That's about how much. Yeah, that's how much that like child labor settlement was. About like $12,000 per.
Yeah, I think the maximum penalty is like $15,000.
It's good business, honestly.
Yeah, it's horrible stuff. Anyways, folks, please read the Gus Bova piece, and if you aren't already subscribed to the Texas Observer, it's an incredible resource. I think if Harvey is ready, we might be bringing him on. It's an honor and a privilege as always to be joined by our good friend Harvey Kaye. How are you doing?
I'm okay. I've been just thinking to myself, when I first met you guys, Matt was wearing the hat, not you.
It's almost a hat day for me too. I'm feeling a little bit.
Well, and I was thinking, should I run downstairs and get my LSU cap on as long as you wear it?
We're gonna be rivals soon, right?
Yep.
Well, Harvey, I mean, again,
it's always, to see you guys.
It's always great to see you, and appreciate you taking the time, folks. Remember that Harvey's also going to be joining us in the post game as well. But I mean, there's a few things that I wanted to talk to you about tonight, Harvey. Just like for disclosure's sake, so people know that Harvey is now an advisor to the Marianne Williamson campaign, which is very exciting in a lot of ways. But before we get to Marianne Williamson and this campaign, I know we've had you on to sort of talk about this in the past, but like one thing for us when Biden first takes office, there was all this talk in progressive media, not so much the Jacobin, but maybe the more mainstream progressive media, if that makes sense, about how Joe Biden is like this embodiment of FDR, and Joe Biden's going to be like a reluctant FDR, was sort of like the line. As a scholar of FDR, I mean, could you give us your assessment of the first few years of the Biden presidency?
Yeah, and I just will note that my assessment after 1 year was actually a long interview with Luke Savage for Jacobin. Oh, and I was requested to say hello to both of you from Luke.
Oh,
Okay.
nice.
Nice.
He was
I love
just
Luke.
praising you in a number of texts today. So
That's wonderful.
so there you go. Well, okay. This FDR thing it caught me by surprise when they first did it. And of course, Ron Klain, I assume, who was the chief of staff at the outset for Biden, made it a point of getting Biden to put a portrait of Franklin Roosevelt up on the wall. Now, let me make it clear to everyone, so I don't have to read it in the in the sidebar there. There is no doubt about the sins politically and perhaps even morally of FDR. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
We don't need to go there. I don't want. That'll just take us back over the same old territory. But the better question is that if they were projecting Biden as in some ways the new FDR, then there were certain kinds of things that Americans had a right to expect. And by the way, most Americans did not expect what they really should have expected. And I'll get to that. Here's what I mean by that. Well, and I'll also remind everyone that back when Obama ran for the presidency the first time, that would be 2008, that every magazine of a political sort, maybe some of a non-political sort, portrayed Obama as the new FDR, the resurrection of FDR. And I mean it from The Nation over to National Review, the flagship for many years of the conservative, I put this in quotes, intelligentsia in the United States. So there was no, that was supposed to be the case, and that was decidedly not the case. Okay, fair enough. No reason to argue that. With Biden, one might have imagined that he would have possibly picked up on the idea itself. But let's not forget, and not to I don't want to trivialize the conversation, but let's take the first instance in which he revealed that he was not FDR. So the question of a $15 an hour minimum wage that Bernie proposed as part of the American Rescue Plan. Now, you could say, well, it couldn't work because you had Manchin and Sinema. Well, it turned out that 8 Democrats in the Senate blocked it. And I will note that 2 of those senators were the senators from Delaware. Now, let's not forget, likely if they were the senators from Delaware, that means along the way, their political careers were mentored by Joe Biden.
Yep.
And as we go forward, I want everyone to realize that victory in legislation is not going to be the only thing Americans are going to look for. They're going to look for the fact, has this president made an effort to rally, first of all, the congressional delegation of Democrats, and beyond that, American political forces, from labor to, what we used to call the civil rights movement or the Black Lives Matter movement, and a whole host of forces that should have been mobilized in support of the kinds of things that he promised, and often fell into the case. Well, he had Manchin and Sinema to deal with or whatever. Okay, so for a start, that looked bad. You couldn't get $15 an hour minimum wage. By the way, it isn't just Biden. It's this whole Democratic Party. Yeah. It's just maddening, unbelievably maddening. Mm-hmm. And I remember everyone got really excited because he changed the legal counsel at the National Labor Relations Board. Mm-hmm. But meanwhile, in a very fundamental way, over this past more than 2 years, what we've seen is the National Labor Relations Board has a lot of work to do. And my understanding is they never increased the budget for it. So that's not going to help all those workers out there. Let's not forget the movements, the efforts to organize at Amazon and Starbucks, the 2 main things we've been talking about for a few years now. They have to go shop by shop. Mm-hmm. And I don't remember the number, but the number of Amazon warehouses is just like multiplies like bunny rabbits. And the Starbucks, think about the effort to organize Starbucks across the country. Actually, that has been an incredible campaign. Anyhow, so it is the case that they failed in those terms. Then, they didn't get Build Back Better, right? But let me jump ahead now to something which still haunts me, and people may not appreciate what was really going on. So the railway workers desperately wanted not simply a wage increase, they wanted sick days, And I'm surely most Americans had to have been shocked to find out that sick days are not a part of the contract for these folks. Okay. Now, my understanding that this would have been a conversation before that it ever came up as a bill to block a strike by railroad. It would have come up in the previous summer, August, September at the latest. And I cannot help but imagine, because I see no reason not to believe that Biden basically talked to the railway boss and said, don't worry, and repeated the idea, nothing's going to change. I mean, literally betrayed the workers. This is the guy who claimed to be, sorry, I'm getting all revved up here.
This was, I'm sorry not to cut you off, but like, this was, I found to be like one of the darker moments of like, of a lot of things. I mean, this was a real setback. Even
more than the BBB thing. I think this was,
yes, even more, I think more. And by the way, more telling if you're a union person. I mean, oh my God, we can't debate in the middle. So now think of this. Think about how unimaginative this administration is, because you had the November elections coming up, November 2022, and Christmas not too far off beyond that. Biden should have gone in to the railway guys, railway bosses, and said, here's the deal. You're going to do exactly what the workers are demanding, or I'm going to be the president who saved Christmas. I will sign an executive order based on national security and decency, nationalizing the railroads until these things are effected. And I, as president, will make sure that those things are granted. And if you want the railways back, you're going to have to bow to it. I mean, think about that, and then he could go before the American people and say, I cannot imagine a Christmas shut down by railway bosses. I mean, they might have done damn well. They wouldn't have lost the House probably in November as they did. Okay. So,
I mean, the election, like, it seemed to me like the labor unions did them a solid by delaying. Maybe my memory is hazy on this, but my understanding is it could have came to a head prior to the election, and Biden administration was done a solid that it was moved after it. And then, so like any election,
they had a temporary deal. Yeah. They negotiated a temporary deal in the summer.
Right. Yeah. And it's like, to keep it off the front pages. And like, that was not to their benefit, it turned out.
Yeah. Well, the temporary deal is you don't act yet. We'll screw you later.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay? We'll screw you at Christmas. How's that? That's what we'll do.
No, but like, I mean, I appreciate like that point, because I think a lot of times when people talk about Biden, both like, let's say maybe like the left, and I'm talking about like the DSA members, Jackman Circuit, right, is like, you have to recognize, for example, that like the president has tremendous amounts of power, both formally and informally. And the way that they wield that is oftentimes as important as like the constraints that they face, right? Because like kind of like MSNBC thing is like, well, we can't be disappointed in Biden because like he hasn't had like these big super majorities that he would need to legislate. But like in this example right here, one of that I think was very consequential. Like, remember too, folks, and I know you know this, but just like to the audience, that like this comes up to vote in Congress, right? This vote that happens on the request of the Biden administration, right? This was not something that was forced on him by the Republicans. This is them being proactive to pursue this tactic, which they could have done something very, very differently on, as Harvey was sort of laying out there.
Yeah. And then, of course, there's the shocker that I don't know I believe AOC voted along with others.
She did. So only Rashida Tlaib voted against breaking the rail strike.
And Mary Peltola.
She
had the best line.
I don't know Mary Peltola. Who's that?
Alaska, I believe, a new incoming freshman, and said, you can't cross labor, which is all that needed to be really said. So
I like her.
I'll find the full. I'll find the full.
It's all right. And then and AOC was interviewed by, was it Ryan Grimm, I guess?
Yeah, it was
asked that question. Was it? No, it was David Sirota. Sirota, I believe it is. And she danced. Sorry, I'm not trying to play off her original pre-congressional dance. She danced on the question. I mean, she should have just said, what a terrible mistake I made.
Well, I mean, like, I want to keep the focus a little bit on them,
Yeah,
but
sorry.
like, no, that's fine. Like, I mean, I was going to say something else that, like, no, I mean, I think that was one of the darker moments for like the entirety of like the Bernie movement, in the sense of like this was a really important moment in the fight for working class people, and when it came down to the wire, obviously Biden fails, right? Like, but like, frankly, like expectations for that are low. It was a really disappointing moment to see something that was so clear a line could be drawn, and not being able to be there. And like the AOC defense, I'm sorry, I'll just say this, like, it was a very strange one where it's like she talked to some workers who said this, right?
Yeah.
Which is
Yeah.
like, again, like whatever. But like, you are like allegedly like a socialist in office, like you should be able to look at the way that power is sort of distributed and what different factions exist within like the labor movement, right?
Yeah.
And when you have radical unions basically like literally saying things like we should be nationalizing the railroads, and you're choosing to talk to, and in fact, like, she wasn't even talking to railroad workers, for the most part. She talked to a little bit of leadership, and one of the unions that she was saying she talked to, I believe, like represented like grocers in Long Island, right? Which is like fine. I'm not saying you shouldn't talk to everybody, but it was like one of these things, like, I talked to the group, right? Like, I talked to some workers, therefore I have the understanding, versus like a Marxist or a socialist approach is like, where are the fissures? Where is like the tension? Who is leading the more radical and militant side of this thing? Anyways, it was just like it's something that's been personally very devastating for me to watch. Like, I can't say tremendously surprised, but I think it was something that was so bad for that left project that we've all been a part of for so many years, that, like, to me was in some ways more devastating than like a Bernie loss into South Carolina or anything else that we've been through.
Well, I mean, it really was I mean, look, the Progressive Caucus is progressive in name only as a group, let's face it. But they were dubbed the Squad. One presumed they would coordinate to some extent. Okay. And their capacity to, in fact, I'll tell you, and this may eventually segue us to Marianne Williamson, is there are times when they don't seem to realize that if they stood up publicly and issued a manifesto, something along those lines, they'd be helping their own party. Bowing to what the Democratic Party is about right now is just literally going to take the Democratic Party nowhere. That's the key. Okay. And the Biden administration has been really disappointing. I used to joke, I probably told you, maybe you guys heard me say this on Michael's show or even here once. The one time I really liked Joe Biden is when he plagiarized his speeches. And why was that? Because he plagiarized Neil Kinnock, who was the head of the British Labour Party and came out of Welsh coal mining family. So, I thought, hey, this guy could be pretty good. He chooses his plagiarism carefully.
Well, Biden voted against breaking the rail strike in the 90s too, as a senator.
Oh, that's the friend of the working person, right?
Yeah.
Well, so just programmatically, folks, Harvey is going to be joining us in the post game, and we're going to be talking a lot more about this in general, and also people can leave us some questions. So just so you know, I want to talk a lot more about Marianne Williamson Harvey, but just so you know, we're gonna do about 10 minutes before we jump over the post game. So I wanted.
So we're not here for the next hour with everybody. We're gonna do.
Yeah, we'll release some of the good stuff for folks after. Don't worry about that. But for people who want to get this live with us now, you'll have to jump over the post game. But like in this first 10 minutes, because I want to talk more in depth with you.
Post game is for patrons, correct?
Post game is for patrons. Yeah.
Yeah. Everyone out there, you hear that?
Yeah, you should be coming over. But just like in 10 minutes, anyways, we're gonna talk more about it more in depth. But like, like you've come out behind Marianne Williamson's campaign, and we just talked about some of the problems with Joe Biden's presidency. I mean, I know this is a broad question, and I'm not worried about you being able to answer it though. Could you tell folks like why you find such hope in the Marianne Williamson campaign right now?
But can I do that as a personal story?
Yes, that sounds great.
Okay, I hope this fits in 10 minutes. Okay, if you had asked me a year ago, say April, what do you think of Marianne Williamson? I would have said to you, I have no idea. I did not know. I mean, I heard of her. I knew she had run last time. And I liked the fact that when she knew it wasn't going to happen, she backed Bernie. I mean, I knew that, but I really didn't know. And out of the blue, she contacted me and said, would you come on my podcast? And mostly, I mean, anybody who has 2 million followers invites me on anything. I'm not going to say no. Okay. And I said, sure. But I didn't actually know what she wanted to talk about. So I was hypothesizing. So I said, you know what? I better read one of her books. So I actually went out and I bought this book. Now, let me make two things clear to everyone. I think I've only used the word spiritual a dozen times. That was the 13th. Okay. And the second thing is I have not bought a book with the title having the word love in the title, probably since the 1960s, when everyone was reading The Art of Loving by Erich Fromm, who was a member of the Frankfurt School of Social Research. Okay. So this was not any, but but when I read it in preparation for whatever was going to come, I can tell you, I really liked it. It isn't a book about love, although that's imperative in her discourse. It really was a real conversation with the American people about where we've gone wrong and what we need to do. And now she's not a socialist, okay, but none of these people are, okay. I was looking for a candidate, and at that point I wasn't actually looking for a candidate, but I was fascinated to talk to her because of the things she said in that book about politics and civil society and so on. And then she, in fact, I went onto Twitter and I said, people should read this book. And I'm going to make something even more remarkable of a statement. I actually think it's the best presidential campaign book I've ever read because, and I used to have my students read them whenever it was an election year. Obama's was a triangulation, basically. In fact, my students back then liked McCain's presidential campaign book more than they did Obama's campaign book. And my students were overwhelmingly a progressive group. Anyhow, so it came as a really, really big surprise. And as a read, even better than Bernie's stuff, generally, frankly, to be honest. Okay. Though Bernie and I have a firmer tie regarding questions of socialism and social democracy, perhaps. I then went on the show and she just wanted to talk about FDR. And she wanted to pull out FDR's real progressivism. And even I'm convinced more and more that we utterly underestimate FDR's radicalism or the radicalism of his presidency. So, and a week later, after we finished that one, she called me and said, that was really good. Can we do a live stream on how FDR would handle inflation? I said, sure. We did that. And we got into a long conversation, still on a Zoom with each other, though not for public broadcasting. And I was really startled at just how committed she was to a progressive politics. I'm saying progressive. I don't want to exaggerate how far to the left that might be. And we ended up doing like daily texting and exchanges and conversation. And I ran a speaker series here at the university for 33 years of my 42 years on the faculty. And my young colleague, John Shelton, who you should think about having on, by the way.
I know John. Yeah, he's great. Yeah.
Oh, good. I'm glad you know.
To
be honest, he's.
I play fantasy football with him.
Oh, good. Excellent. He's a good 30 years younger than I am, but he's my best friend. Okay. For what it's worth. Okay. And he's got this new book out, which is really important. So, okay. So I said to John, John and I were talking because they took the speaker series and they named it the Harvey Kaye Speaker Series to honor my retirements. Okay. And the first person we had in was Sarah Nelson. And then the following year, this would have been this past autumn, we brought in Marianne. And she and I spent a great deal of time talking. And she started talking to me about the idea of running again and, how I would respond to that. And I could tell you that I was very interested in what she was saying. And more importantly, this is the shocker, okay? And you could say, well, it's the guy supporting her because of his own ego. No. She really wanted to embrace a project I've been pushing for years now. And I worked very closely with Nina Turner a year ago. I mean, I was very close to Nina. We're still in almost daily contact. And it's an idea of redeeming and advancing in a 21st century version, an economic bill of rights, originally proposed by FDR in 1944. 1960s, A. Philip Randolph produced, along with Bayard Rustin, a freedom budget built around the idea of the Economic Bill of Rights. Martin Luther King Jr., not long before his assassination, tragically, issued a call for an Economic Bill of Rights. Bernie, moderately so, well, to some extent in 2015-16, but then all the more so in 2019-20, advanced the idea of an Economic Bill of Rights. And here is Marianne, just like Nina, basically reaching out to me because they wanted to embrace and argue for and push. And I thought, if this is the case, I'm ready to help this woman. I definitely was. And in the post game, I can talk far more about that if you'd like.
Yeah, well, I mean, I appreciate that, and folks, I think we're going to jump over the post game right now, and we can talk a little bit more in depth about Marianne Williamson's campaign and some of the ideas and strategy as well.
I also want to ask Harvey about when FDR became cool again, because there must have been a period that it was not cool for Democrats to be like, "Oh yeah, this new guy, he's our new FDR." And then all of a
You want to
sudden,
ask me that here or in the post game?
let's do that in the post game.
Great.
In the post game. And folks, so you get access at patreon.com/leftreckoning. We'll try to take some questions. If you do want to leave us a message, 1-940-289-7234. But as we said at the beginning, please keep them more in the 30 to 45 second range so that we can get to folks and not keep Harvey too long. All right, folks, we'll be over there
as long as you want me.
Well, thank you very much.
I would never say no to you two guys.
Tell the people to keep the call short. No, I appreciate that. I'm always so thankful to have you in the post game. It's gonna be a lot of fun, folks. So jump over patreon.com/leftreckoning. We'll be over there in about 5-10 minutes.
Peace.
Should I go put my LSU cap on?